All right, hey everyone. Today we're talking about back handsprings. Back handsprings are a flight skill, and they are probably one of the key flight skills in the realm of gymnastics because they cross over to so many things. They generate a lot of power, or they really help convert the energy into whatever it is you want to do. So they're a huge element in throwing all the really big tumbling skills. You're going to see them a lot, especially in women's gymnastics. Men tend to do a lot of things out of roundoffs, but the back handspring in women's gymnastics really has a very influential role. So let's dive in. Well, that's a lot of information, huh? Okay, so right here is getting more into the terminology, some of the words that we've been talking about, but now I'm just breaking it down into a back handspring. So the number one, we're talking a back handspring is a late block. So from image 1 to 2, the center mass needs to be falling over the pivot point in the direction that a back handspring is going, which is backwards. It's traveling from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen. And so the number one is just reminding you that it's a late block, which means the center of mass needs to fall. So as it transitions to number 2, there's a fall and use of the shoulders and hips. So you basically, what you need to understand is oftentimes jumping is taught with bending your knees, but that's not necessarily needed in a back handspring. You actually can just use the hip and shoulder action. The knee bend tends to cause a buckle and adjust the center of mass in relationship to the pivot point, which then kind of messes up the back handspring a bit. For the most part, you're always going to have some form of a knee bend that is going to be seen when you slow a back handspring down, and if you're to watch it on slow-mo. But the goal is to train it like you're not bending the knees. The number 3 image is stay on the surface as long as possible. So you're keeping your feet on the surface, you're throwing the hands into the surface, and you're extending the hips up to the ceiling. A lot like what a front handspring was doing, except the front handspring was keeping the hands on the surface and driving the feet into the surface. This is keeping the feet on and driving the hands into the surface. Number 4, you need to be traveling horizontally. So this is the flight phase, but you want the flight phase to be traveling horizontally, not vertically. And that's a big error that you see in back handsprings where people jump up and straight up and straight down essentially, and they can't support themselves and the body collapses on itself. Number 5, I'm using the term late block, but I really actually call this a stop action. You're not supposed to be blocking off your hands. So your hands aren't actually pushing off the surface hoping that you would rise, because if your hands are blocking off the surface, you see where your feet are in the 5th image is they're to the ceiling, they're up. And so if you're blocking off your hands, your feet would be rising up, and you don't want that to happen. So actually it's a stopping action. I'm just using the term late blocks because you should be more familiar with it from prior videos. So you're really not trying to make contact with your hands on the floor. You're actually going to number 6, which is closing the shoulder angle. And so there's not actually a push off your hands. There's a snap down with the feet. And if the horizontal travel is enough, that rotation will actually pull your hands off the floor. If the horizontal travel is not enough, the linear momentum is not enough, then your hands are not going to get pulled off the floor. So you keep the hands on the floor as long as possible in number 6. Number 7, you're traveling horizontally, so you have another flight phase happening essentially, and then you're snapping the feet under the center of mass. So in 8, you're set up where the center of mass is falling over the pivot point, ready to convert into the next skill. In this case, number 8 is setting itself up for a back handspring, more than likely. So get familiar with these positions, because this kind of is all the little stuff that you're trying to fix. The overarching picture is if your linear momentum is correct, the back handspring will basically solve itself. If the angular momentum is correct, it'll solve itself. And if the rotational inertia is correct, it'll solve itself. Linear momentum. So you're just trying to go from one star to the next, trying to travel through that distance, whatever that distance is. Again, that's the way to test to see if you have linear momentum. How far can you move your center of mass? Angular momentum. Okay, so back handsprings, if you think about placing your hands to where your feet are, you're going to create a lot of angular momentum, but you're not going to travel very far. If you place your hands as far away from your feet as possible, you may not actually rotate. So you might just stop yourself. So you'd have to have some form of linear momentum to help with the rotation. So just looking at where are my hands in relationship to my feet and what am I trying to accomplish. And it's more about connections. What skill are you connecting it to? And where are you trying to go with the back handspring? Just some simple things to look at. The first image, A, shows you that the arrows are pushing the feet up, the hips horizontally, and the hands down. This is how it creates rotation. The image B is showing that the hips are getting pushed forwards over the feet as the chest is getting pushed down and the feet are up. And this actually starts to kind of collapse on itself or cancel itself out. And so that's not going to help your rotation. That's usually where bad back handsprings go, is in B, where the hips are pushing forwards, not back in the direction of the body. So back handspring problems. So the image 1, go to 2. So the center of mass is over the feet. The knee bend causes the center of mass to travel over the pivot point. But then what happens is the hips tend to push forwards, putting the body in front of the center of mass, pulling it. And so when they do the back handspring in the 4th image, you're going to see where the hand position is in relationship to the center of mass. The center of mass is behind the hands, and that down force on the arms tends to cause the arms to crumble. And so it's kind of like the body's moving forwards while it's trying to rotate backwards, and that's just detrimental and difficult to pull off. It's a gainering action, but since you're not trying to gainer, it doesn't work out well. Here's some more back handspring problems. So image A is what you do not want to do. Image B is better. Image A is basically saying you're jumping to this arch position, your hands touch, your feet go to the ceiling, but in image A, your center of mass is behind your hands, and that's where you're going to collapse. Now this might be good for vault because you're trying to snap up, but in the image B, you have more turnover. So when the hands make contact and the feet are rising over the body, the center of mass is traveling over the hands. It's less down pressure on the hands. It's keeping the center of mass traveling horizontally, and so B is better. Rotational inertia, just looking at basically shape changes, you're going to be passing through a handstand phase. So imagine how big the body has to get and then how small it has to get, and just the timing that you have to do all that shape change. So there's a lot going on with the back handspring, just to be aware of. So here we have pretty just kind of key points to be looking at. You have the blue star, and you're basically trying to travel from one blue star to the next without losing momentum. The tap phase is basically from the jump to the handstand, and then from the handstand to the feet on the surface, that's the snap phase. Now, if you were to do this exact same motion pretty much to the ceiling, then you'd just be doing a back layout. So a back handspring is the same arch, pass through straight, snap. That's basically back rotation you're going to see in what type of flipping you're doing, but this is just staying horizontally. The block is letting you know the center mass is traveling over the feet. It's a late block. There's a flight phase. The flight is the shoulders and hips opening, so the hands and feet are going behind the shoulders and hips, and it's that opening action that's going to simultaneously, when they both open, is going to help create the rotation. When the hands make contact, you're trying to have the center mass over the hands. You're not trying to push the hands off the surface, but you're actually closing the shoulders. And when you snap the hips and the feet down, as long as you have linear momentum, it will pull your hands off the surface. And then you have another flight phase, which you're trying to get your feet under. Hand positioning. You do not want to have your fingers turned out, danger zone. That is how you break your elbows or you cause damage, wrist, shoulder, just not the way that your body supports itself. The next two images are safe, whether your hands are parallel or a finger slightly turned in. I prefer fingers slightly turned in just due to support things and getting rid of bad habits, because it's better to err on in than out. Connections. So if we're trying to do an early block A, that's going to send our center of mass up. And if we're doing a late block B, that's going to send our center of mass down. Down is how we connect onto the surface, essentially, and A is how we pull off multiple flips and twists and all those things by trying to go up. So connections. Trampoline, testing linear momentum. Simple thing is just, can you move your center of mass? So you do a seat drop, you go to a back drop, and then you bounce to a handstand. It's just seeing, can you move your center of mass, and how well do you move your center of mass. So this is a rotational inertia drill exercise where you do a seat drop and you try to shoot open to a bridge and land back into a seat drop. You can start in the bridge position and do bridge, seat drop, bridge. You can also do bridge, back drop, bridge. The main thing is trying to go from seat to bridge is essentially the back handspring positioning. It's a pretty technical thing, so if you've never taught it before, you actually need to talk to somebody who has, get help on it so you can kind of avoid the dangers that can come with it, because most often than not, when an athlete is not ready, this is a pretty scary thing to do. Back extension rolling, testing angular momentum. So just doing a back extension roll to see if you can lift your center of mass up something, that's going to really tell if you can do a back handspring. You can do it down a wedge. That'd be minimum requirement, is doing back extension roll down a wedge. Floor should be, as a base average standard. Up a wedge, it's more of a challenge because it's pretty ridiculously hard. But the main thing is, can you get your center of mass to rise? Because you're going to have to jump and get your center of mass to rise and turn over. Rotational inertia, V-slaps, you're laying on your back. You sit up as fast as you possibly can, trying to get your hands to reach over your feet, hiding your ears with your arms, and then slam your body open as hard and aggressively as you can. This is usually done on an 8-incher or a resi mat, and you're trying to go, like 10 in 10 seconds essentially. But it's a speed exercise, so you're working on aggressive shape changing, change of directions. Very similar to the V-slap. This is a hip slap. It's starting in a pike position. This is more accurate to what a back handspring is doing, because as you're opening up the hips and armpits, you're actually driving the feet into the surface, and that's more what a back handspring does. This is another drill that helps you understand how to move your center of mass and sees if you can cause rotation. So you start in a pike position, you jump forwards, opening your shoulders and hips, and you have the body rotate so that you land on your back. So it's traveling forwards, it's gainering essentially, and it's testing your linear ability and your angular momentum ability. So here's a trampoline seat straight doggy. This is to test your max effort and to really see if you can just move your center of mass and shape change well. So going from a seat drop to a straight and just seeing if you can get extension, and then going back to that doggy and transition back and forth. So you're going to go doggy straight to seat, and you're really just finding the straight position. So it's more like how quickly can you shape change and how well can you move your center. It's just the reverse doggy straight seat. So you've put connections into it. You're really going to have to work the surface to find that straight position, because it's actually more challenging than you would realize, you'd think. But it really lets you know about those shape changes, which is great to see if somebody's ready to back handspring. Test them on this. So finishing positions, you can finish in a push-up position, finish in a pike down, or scoop through. It just depends on what you're trying to do. Finishing a push-up position is great because it teaches core control, and it does not try to use the hands so much. The pike down is helping you figure out how to keep your hands on a surface and get your feet down. The scoop through to back is more like for Suks and your Chenkos. So that looks like it's everything. That is the back handspring. There's a lot more to a back handspring when it comes to connecting back handsprings and doing flips out of them, but you really got to get good at seeing just the little pieces so you can see where the breakdown is happening. You want to fix all problems in a back handspring at the beginning of the skill, so whatever error you see at the beginning, that's what needs to get solved, because that in turn will fix the problems at the end of the skill. So there you have it, back handsprings. They're flight skills. Watch the video a million times, ask questions, keep the conversation going. Remember to keep the kids safe, because back handsprings, while are fun, they do have an element of risk and danger to them when performed improperly. So there you go.